In a stunning reversal, Greece has imposed capital controls on its people, shutting the banks for this week. Now, we expected this a week ago, and everyone was surprised when it didn't happen. As a matter of fact, Max Kaiser said on the Alex Jones show, it looks like they're going to extend and pretend. Well, they were still pretending yesterday morning. The Drudge Report pointed out that yesterday morning, the Greek finance minister said that he would oppose even the very concept of capital controls, but by the evening, the Greek government imposed those same capital controls. You can look at the tweet right there. That's the Greek finance minister. He says capital controls within a monetary union are a contradiction in terms. The Greek government opposes the very concept. And that got 3,600 retweets. There were people who responded to that, many people. They said, well, the BBC seems to be saying something completely different. And of course they did. And I speculated yesterday when I was on the radio, I thought perhaps the BBC was trying to scare the Greek people like they did the people in Scotland. Nevertheless, it was the Greek government itself that was deceiving people. They've now shut the banks. They say that they're going to limit withdrawals to $67 per day. Now, I am assuming that's per account. So if you've got a family with more than one person, that amount could get very, very small indeed. It has also roiled the financial markets. Greece is now going to default. They expected it to default earlier today. Wall Street Journal is reporting that they will default on tomorrow's payment of $1.73 billion to the IMF. The Wall Street Journal says European leaders are appealing to Greeks to vote yes in a referendum on their country's bailout. That referendum is going to be on Thursday. In other words, the banks want the Greek people to accept more debt. They may complain about being in massive amounts of debt that they can't service, but they're still begging them to borrow more. Extend a referendum and accept the bailout, they say. As of Tuesday, Greece will be cut loose from the international rescue loans for the first time in more than 5 years, as a report from Wall Street Journal. Now, the Greek government is saying they are setting up this referendum in spite of what the EU officials wanted them to do. They say the EU showed contempt for allowing Greeks to vote in this referendum. This is an article on Infowars.com. They say, according to Greek finance minister, the very idea that the government would consult the people on a problematic proposal put to it by the institutions was treated with incomprehension and often with disdain bordering on contempt. I was even asked, how do you expect common people to understand such complex issues? He said, well, democracy did not have a good day in yesterday's Eurogroup meeting. So we'll see what happens with that. But certainly for this week, the Greek people are going to be experiencing quite a bit of hardship if they can even find the cash in the machines to get $67 a day out of their account. And of course, it's had a big impact on financial markets worldwide. Global markets are slumping today. Just an example of how they've been affected in different countries. Germany's DAX index is down 3.6%. France's index is down 3.7%. Britain's FTSE is down 2%. The S&P down 1.7%. The Dow down 1.6%. The NASDAQ down 2.1%. But listen to this. This is how much the Greek people, the Greek government, is paying on 10-year government bonds. 14% interest. Now, that's about where you start out with your credit cards. But this is, and I understand that Greece has a lot of risk involved in it. Nevertheless, I don't think they're going to be able to get out of debt at those kind of interest rates with the kind of situation that the economy is in. We'll talk about that in just a moment. First, Zero Hedge asks, how could the Greek experts, quote unquote, be so wrong? And he looks at one of them, Tom Lee. He says, best known for predicting in August 2008 that stocks would rise much higher by the end of 2008. He doesn't have a very good track record here. And as recently as last week, this would be last Tuesday, June the 23rd, he said, Greece isn't the systemic risk that it was 3 years ago. He said that on CNBC. He said, focus on U.S. fundamentals, which have been really good. But then he points out that Mario Draghi, of course, Super Mario, who was a technocrat that was put in charge, he goes back to 2013. At the time, they asked him the question, let's say the situation in Greece or Spain is going to deteriorate even further. They want to get out or they're forced out of the Eurozone. Is there a plan in place so that the markets don't totally collapse? And Super Mario, Goldman Sachs expert, technocrat, put in charge by the other technocrats, said, well, you're really asking questions that are so hypothetical, I don't even have an answer to them. Well, I may have a partial answer. These questions are formulated by people who vastly underestimate what the euro means for the Europeans, for the euro area. They vastly underestimate the amount of political capital that has been invested in the euro. That's why you have a very hard time asking people like me, what would happen if? And he says, no, there is no plan B. So the experts, at least what they're saying is, they don't have a plan B. Let's take a look at the IMF, because they're part of the Troika that is forcing them into this situation. Look at their projections. Look at how optimistic their projections were. This is a tweet that was put out by Jamie McGeever of Reuters. And let's just take a look at a couple of these numbers here. Just in 2012, they'd predicted growth in Greece, in the Greek economy, GDP growth, of 1.1%. It was actually negative 7%. Big difference. In 2013, they predicted 2.1% growth. It was actually minus 4.2. On the other side, on unemployment, in 2012, they expected just under 15%. It turned out to be just over 24%. They didn't learn anything. The next year, they predicted about the same thing, 14.3. And again, it was even higher, 27.3% unemployment. As one person pointed out, we could do better than that just throwing darts at the board. But think about that. 27% unemployment. And of course, those are government numbers. Those are always optimistic, just like these IMF forecasts, just like Mario Draghi's forecasts. And it's not stopping at Greece. Now, Puerto Rico today, as Greece said that they are most likely going to default tomorrow, Puerto Rico says they're going to default on their debt as well, starting to spread. Puerto Rico's governor says the island's debts are, quote, not payable. He says he needs to pull the island out of a, quote, death spiral. He concluded the Commonwealth cannot pay its roughly $72 billion in debt. He says the debt is not payable. This is not politics. This is math. And of course, Puerto Rico, to give you an idea of the size of this, is about 3.6 million people. And then this is going to be affecting the municipal bond market for American cities. That's already been hit by the defaults in Stockton, California, as well as the big one in Detroit. This is going to be about 8 times the size of Detroit's default, according to the New York Times. And of course, Puerto Rico is a commonwealth and does not have the option of bankruptcy. Now, Mr. Padilla, who took power in Puerto Rico, said that when he took office, he tried to balance the fiscal situation through austerity measures and fresh borrowing, but he saw that the island was caught in a vicious circle where it borrowed to balance the budget, it raised the debt, and it had an even bigger budget deficit the next year. And so that's the issue before the people of Greece this week. Are they going to vote to continue the same thing they've been doing over and over again? As they point out, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, of course, is insanity. And that's what Puerto Rico is saying. So we're seeing this spread, these defaults. It's going to affect the market for everyone. It's going to affect the loan rates for other American cities as well. It's not just going to be Puerto Rico. Now, the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, says that the world is defenseless against the next financial crisis. This is an article up on Infowars.com. They say the world will be unable to fight the next global financial crash as central banks have used up their ammunition trying to tackle the last crises. That's the Bank of International Settlements. They say real interest rates have never been so low for so long. They have essentially played that card to the hilt. There is nothing else that they can do about it. That's why you're seeing in this country the concerns about capital control, the concerns about paying attention to how much money people are taking out of the bank, out of their account, how much cash they're withdrawing, talking about banning cash in this country. They know that this is not going to be limited to peripheral states like Greece and Puerto Rico. This is something that is going to spread, most likely, to the core countries like Germany and the United States. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, too, about the Bank of International Settlement, because I think it's important for us to understand where this is all coming from. The Bank of International Settlement was created back in 1930, and they originally created this to facilitate the reparations that were being imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. If you remember, those payments were so egregious that it drove Germany into dire economic straits that helped the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. They were incorporated in Switzerland as a private corporation, but they got immunity in all of the states that were part of that organization. We're looking at this right here off of Wikipedia. Anyone can look this up. It's important to understand where these organizations are coming from. And it's also important to understand that during World War II, they were very heavily involved in getting gold out of countries for the Nazis, taking money and assets out of those countries. Because when they would go in and get those reparations, I imagine the way they did it was to get some high-ranking German officials to make sure that Germany was going to turn over that money. Once World War II started, these high-placed Germans began to use the Bank of International Settlement for the Nazis. And you can see in this, as they report on Wikipedia, they say top-level German industrialists and advisors sat on the BIS board, and the BIS was used by Hitler throughout the war with the help of American, British, and French banks. So you can see that these banks are on both sides of the issue. It was a German bank that sent Lenin into Russia to start the Russian Revolution with $10 million in gold in a sealed train. And at the same time, they were creating the Federal Reserve in America. They are starting all of these methods of control. And of course, one of the biggest methods of control is war. That's what we're very concerned about. And it's also interesting, just one last factoid about the Bank of International Settlements. They were going to be disbanded. The Allies were not happy with them after the war. The person who saved them, John Maynard Keynes, the economist that has given us the excuse for borrowing endlessly, telling people through Keynesian economics that macro debt isn't really important. It's just money that we owe to ourselves. Now we're seeing that's not true.